Microaggressions are any sort of acts, behaviors, commentary, assumptions, and even attitudes that can create hostile, discriminatory environments for marginalized people. I know many of you in this room are probably familiar with the idea of microaggressions. Whether you've been the aggressor or the person being aggressed against, I am very certain that you can relate to the feeling of shame that rises within you, insecurity almost. I'm also familiar with microaggressions, and just letting y'all know, there's a very stark difference between saying that someone's pretty and pretty for a black girl, that they are well-spoken, or that they are surprisingly articulate. Needless to say, tone and diction do matter, and it does impact people. So, together, let's all find a way to create a better environment where people can feel welcome, loved, accepted, and validated.
So we have a couple examples of what microaggressions are. The first example is, you're Asian, shouldn't you be good at math? And this stems back to the model minority of how Asians are supposed to be, the perfect immigrant, and how they're the smartest and the best, and everyone should be like them. So when you say this, it makes it feel like there's such a high standard for Asians to reach up to, that when they don't fit that standard, it's almost like you're angry at them. And another one is, see, even I'm blacker, more Asian, more Latino than you. It shows that the person who made this comment had made these little boxes where, certain races have to be like this and that. When it doesn't fit into those boxes, you call them out for it and make them feel like they're not wanted in their own community. And another one, so this one has a little bit of background. I know from my own experience of wearing my natural hair, growing up, everyone's always telling you to straighten it, to make it look less nappy, and it's not professional. So to say this comment when someone's wearing their natural hair, oh, you must be having a bad hair day, it feels like they don't belong in where they are, and their hair is professional, even though it doesn't fit what society deems is professional. And another one is, that's too difficult to say, I'm just going to call you blank. I've got this one so many times with my name, and that's why I just go by a nickname, but you're taking part of their identity and you're replacing it with something else that fits what you want it to be by just not calling them by the name that was given to them in their culture.
Who they can affect. Microaggressions, unlike many things in this world, does not discriminate, whether it be gender, sexuality, race, or even religion. A lot of people think that these are the only subjects that microaggressions affect, but this is just the common ones. Microaggressions play a significant role in people's lives, and what a lot of people don't realize is you can become a victim too. Microaggressions can affect anybody and everybody, and that includes you. Whether you see it happening or not, it does go on, and it hurts. So today we're going to come up with ways on how we feel like we can further better this microaggression in our community, okay? Because microaggressions are things that should not be happening, and they're not okay. And the more we talk about this topic, the less taboo it will become, and the more aware we can be.
Expanding on what Precious said, we got to talk about how we can move forward together. First, we got to express how it made you feel. Let the other party know that what they said or what they did isn't okay, and that it made you feel uncomfortable or insecure, even ashamed. Next, separate intent from impact. I know it's very easy to assume that what people say is what they mean, but that's not always the case. Sometimes we mess up, we say things that are a little ignorant, but that's not what we want to convey. So make sure you can understand that the person is probably better than what they've just said or what they just did. Lastly, educate or encourage education. I am never going to tell you that it is your responsibility to educate someone, simply because we have resources here that you can educate yourself with, whether that be just Google or videos online. You have resources to use. So if you can, try to make it a goal to just let people know, like, hey, here are some resources you can use, whether that be people or videos or documents, and encourage them to better themselves so we can all show more kindness to each other. That way, we can create a beautiful environment where everyone can feel validated and loved.
along with moving forward, you can talk about microaggressions. Make sure you talk about microaggressions with people you trust, whether that's a trusted adult, friend, teacher, family member, mentor, or advisor. If you talk to somebody, it helps, because microaggressions can have a very negative impact on your mental health, and it can make you feel, it can diminish your self-worth. If you feel comfortable enough, have a conversation with the aggressor themselves, because most of the time, the aggressor doesn't understand the impact of their own words. They don't understand the stereotype they put on you, the box they put you in. A good advisor to talk to is Dr. Michaela Thomas. She is here today speaking on microaggressions in her position as Assistant Director of Equity and Inclusion in Central Office.
All right, y'all, give
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. First of all, I'm having a proud mama moment right now because two of those beautiful young ladies were first graders in my class. So just to see them stand up here and do that, like, I don't even know how I'm supposed to follow that. You don't need me to come here and tell you about this, but I appreciate you extending the invitation. So I'm Michaela Thomas, Assistant Director of Equity and Inclusion, and just to give you a little bit about me, taught for 11 years at Cheshire. As soon as Cheshire Elementary opened, I moved in there, and it's been my home ever since. And when Berlin happened, they took our secretary, Amy Minor, and so this became my home too. So I appreciate the opportunity. I wanted to also introduce Dr. Stephen Lewis. He is our new supervisor of equity and inclusion because, as you know, we have 22,000 students in this district. And to think that that work of training people on implicit bias and doing diversity programs, all of that being done by two people is a lot of work, right? So instead of this department just being us, it's all of us. And so these type of education trainings are great because now you have the information and you can go out and spread the word and do the work too, right? So I want to talk about a couple of points here. So you talk about microaggressions, and there are some different types of microaggressions. So the first type is a microassault. So your microassault is going to be something that is explicit and intentional. So like a racial slur, okay, or a swastika, things like that. So that's going to be your microassault. Your micro-insult is where you're saying things like the girls talked about. Oh, you're pretty for a black girl, or you're pretty for a big girl, right? Because we talk about it could be weight, it could be race, it could be anything, right? Another micro-insult is that they mention about you speak English very well for international student, that type of thing. But also from our educator standpoint, if you only call on a certain type of student because you think that they have that answer, that is a micro-insult. In my work, one of the things that I faced being, I don't know, I would say, first of all, at Cheshire, I was the only African-American teacher for the entire time. So I'm sure you know that I have had some of these micro-assaults happen and micro-insults happen. But like having a teacher come into a team and not giving them what they need to succeed. So for example, if you have a team of teachers and they don't provide you with the information that, like that all the rest of the teachers have, that could be considered a microaggression, right? Because you're not giving me everything I need to be successful in this role. So things like that. Now, a micro-invalidation is the third type, okay? A micro-invalidation is where people are like colorblind. Okay, they make comments or actions that dismiss the experiences of historically disadvantaged groups. So you can say things like, oh, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. That would be considered a micro-invalidation. If you say, assuming that people can't do things for themselves, so like automatically asking a person in a wheelchair, and you're like, oh, I'll help you with that. That is a form of a micro-invalidation because you're assuming that they can't do it on their own, right? And that's not what we want to do. So we had something called Dear OLSD. If you know on Instagram, there with like all these different accounts of microaggressions and racism and sexism and all these different things happening in our district. There were over 363 posts, okay, of all these students who are experiencing this in our district. The reason why this type of work that this group is doing that is so important is because these kids are hurting and they didn't have anyone, a trusted adult, to probably come to or talk to. So we want to make sure that we are those people for them, right? And you have so many good people, especially here at Berlin, that you can talk to and reach out to. You can always definitely call me, email me anytime. Dr. Stephen Lewis, he's available too. So just know that we're here, and we want the next time we have like a Dear OLSD for it to be like all the great things happening, all the changes that you're seeing and you're feeling in the classroom. Because I can do stuff, we can do stuff at the district level, but unless you're feeling it on a day-to-day basis in your classrooms, in your hallways, in your cafeteria, it doesn't matter, right? So we need to work together to make sure that that's happening. The other thing I want to mention is about the hair comment, because I get that a lot. I like to change my hair up, and Amy knows this, I'll just have random hairstyles. And it's funny because people are like, wow, your hair grew that long? And I'm like, no, it did not. This is weed. You know, and I take them through and I educate them on what it is, right? But like they said, you shouldn't always have to be the person doing that. People can do their own research. It's super easy. There's this thing called Google, right? We just type in there and you can find out all you want to know, right? Instead of making that person, Black, Asian, whoever the person is, even part of LGBTQ, to tell you and teach you. It is up to you to find out that information, right? So, and nowadays, I mean, back in the day, people used to get fired for hair. I mean, they would wear a big afro and they would get fired. But now we have something called the Crown Act, which it is now against the law to fire anyone because of their hairstyle. They should be able to wear their hair however they want without any repercussions, right? So look up the Crown Act too. Share that with your friends. Let them know, hey, don't do that. That's against the law. Okay. And I wanted to offer for Dr. Stephen Lewis to come in. Do you have any advice for anyone or things that you want to share too?
Well, everything that I've heard so far is 100% spot on. The main thing about microaggressions, though, is that it can occur in almost any form and can be very innocent in our environment, in our situations, in our world. It's how we treat each other as human beings when microaggressions become the problem. Because there is so much in life that we don't know, So we might do something, say something, become engaged in something that we think on the outside and inside in our hearts is okay. But the person of whom we're directing that activity, that conversation, that action towards, it is not. And that's where the intent versus the impact is so important. And it does involve humility. One, the person who is creating the microaggression to accept the feedback from someone else that says, hey, you made me feel a little uncomfortable with that statement. Or maybe the way that you treated me was not right. Do you treat other people like that? And then to also have the courage, the person who the microaggression is occurring to actually say something. Because it's also, some people then come back and say, well, you're too sensitive. You're too this, you're too that. Well, the bottom line is that whatever it was that you intended to do, the impact was this on me, and I'm the one who's experiencing it. So just be careful with that and understand that there is, it becomes explicit bias, to your point, microassault, when you do it on purpose. Most, if not many, microaggressions are done unintentionally. The problem is that people are not willing to be humble enough and accept the fact that what you've done has hurt someone else. Because we tend to go through life thinking that, we're good. We're not doing things to hurt anybody. So that's just something that I might add to that. But again, the information that the students have given is spot on as to its accuracy and what microaggressions are. So I applaud you. ladies.
Yes. So, we'll leave you with this one thing. So raise your hand if you've ever had a paper cut before. Oh, pretty much everyone, yes. And when you get a paper cut, sometimes it hurts, right? You can feel it. It's very small, very tiny, but you can feel it. Now imagine getting another paper cut the next day in the same exact location on your finger, right? Then the next day, you get another paper cut in the same exact location on your finger. And this keeps happening to you over and over again. What do you think is going to happen to that finger? Anybody? It's going to get infected. It's going to be super painful, right? That is how you have to think the analogy of a microaggression, right? It's something small, like a paper cut. But if you keep on doing it day after day or the impact of it is so strong. And we want to make sure that we are not doing that to other people, allowing people to do that to us, and making sure that when we see it, we say something, okay? So thank you all for having me. I'm going to turn it back over to the girls because I know they want to do some small group stuff, but thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, so now that we heard Dr. Thomas speak, it's a good time to break into our groups or small groups and have a discussion starting with, are microaggressions really micro? If you're standing, you can join a table and just have this discussion.
I was gonna say count to 30 backwards like 3. By doing that,
So my brother asked for it, but he was also double my weight.
Take a big deep breath back up and then run
Okay, so we just had a really hopefully educational conversation on what we do microaggressions are. I hope that was kind of insight for you guys to just talk and see other people's point of views on what microaggressions are and what they are in their lives and stuff like that. So now we're going to break out into the main group discussion and we're going to share some of our answers. And I'm going to leave it to you guys before I start calling all people. So just anybody.
Okay, teach.
But so our first question is, are microaggressions really micro? Does anybody want to answer?
I can answer.
Thank you, Leslie.
We kind of talked about how this is probably a larger issue, and it's probably coming from like a bigger place, almost more systemic and societal, things that are just passed on that seem acceptable on the surface level.
Yeah.
It can seem micro to the person causing the harm, but it probably doesn't feel very micro to the person receiving the harm.
I like that. That's a nice answer. Does anybody else want to add to it or have a counter or anybody?
We also just kind of talked about the idea of like an individual microaggression can be micro, but like if you compound those every day and from multiple directions and in multiple different contexts, it doesn't feel micro anymore, it's not micro.
Yeah. And I also like what Deputy Gaines said. I don't know if you want to add, Mr. Gaines, but what we were talking about earlier about, do you want to add?
Put me on the spot. So it's the environmental part of it. It's a slippery slope because my upbringing is like you hold the door open for ladies. The other day there was a teacher who was carrying a box and there was a young man walking beside her, and I said, "You should be carrying that box for the teacher." And she said to me, "Well, I'm a woman, I can handle this." I'm like, "I understand that, but we need to teach our young males that we need to respect the ladies and carry and open doors for them and things like that. So it's being chivalrous, and we lost that. I think we're losing that as men. And so that, but she probably could have looked at that as microaggression, which here I am trying to teach a young man to be more respectful to the ladies. So it's a slippery slope when we talk about microaggressions.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just gonna add to that is that I think it's communication, you know, just asking someone, like him saying, ma'am, do you need help with that box? Then she could have replied. So giving people, like, I still wanna be chivalrous, I still wanna do that, but maybe giving people the option, and just and letting them answer that question versus just assuming. And that's what I think could make the difference, possibly.
We also talked about in our group, Sean and I talked about how that it's so important and so powerful at that moment to help with the education, both the giver maybe and the receiver in regards to, hey, and it's tough for a 16, 17, 18-year-old to say, boy, what you just said didn't sit right with me. It's one thing for me to say it as a 50-year-old. You know, I've been there, done that, and maybe I can say that, but for a 15, 16, 17-year-old to say, what you just said hurt me. That's tough, but that's where the education can come in, and it's how you respond. But it was a good conversation.
Okay, cool. So our next question is, how do you think microaggressions influence implicit bias? So we were at it.
So we were talking about how different things are normal for different people, and how like some people can think that one thing's okay to say and because of like their home life, but to other people it's seen as like offensive, and how you just need to be like conscious about that kind of stuff.
So it kind of goes back to my food. Anybody else want to add to?
I actually had a really good conversation over here with Mr. Wendell, Haley, and that group. We actually talked about how implicit bias is the reason for microaggressions. Do any of y'all want to add on that? Can we talk about it a little bit more?
Yeah, sure, okay. So, yeah, like Arabella said, we were thinking that implicit bias is actually the cause of microaggression, because it is that bias that makes you make these either intentional or unintentional comments to people. It can definitely influence it, I guess, but we think it's more of like a cause and effect relationship instead.
And just going back to what you said about like home life and the environment that people are brought up in, I think that if you grow up hearing casual microaggressions that aren't being challenged or whatever, that can impact your development of implicit bias and how you move forward in life.
Yeah, and to add to that, Mr. Perry, I know you and Mr. Nader had a conversation about what we felt as if though is a moral or ethical part that you should take when one group, one category says, this is offensive, this is hurting me, and another group is like, no, you're good, you're okay. Well, if 3 people say, it's okay, you can say this, but you're afraid to say it to the 7, and it's like, should you really be saying that? You know what I'm saying? I think there's also a huge moral aspect when it comes to implicit bias, because morally, you know, if you can't say it in front of the majority, but you're okay saying it in front of your little clique, then it's like, there might be some offense to it, you know? Does anyone quickly add before we jump to 3? Okay, great. Question 3, how do you think this influences stereotypes? Does anyone add to that? Anybody look at that?
Yeah, okay, I was waiting, but actually, we actually segued into a thing where we're talking about, does the way you grew up, like what Mr. Gaines said, heavily impact the way you're acting today? And it does, very much so. But we're talking about the time period. Like, some of our grandparents here grew up in the 60s, and the way that they speak now is not necessarily okay. They don't really have the right ideas or the right sort of opposite of hate we were trying to convey. And because of that, you end up hearing things that you don't want to hear, and you have to correct them. But what I found fascinating was that during those periods, during the 60s, during the 70s, that was changed. Like, that was literally the civil rights. That was literally Stonewall. Like, all of that coming together, it brought them up. And yet, sometimes you find yourself wondering, like, where were they in history? And another thing that we talked about was privilege. Like, if you were not at all the minority during that time period, it didn't affect you. You didn't have to worry about it. You didn't have to talk about it. It just didn't affect you. So you really just probably sat back and did nothing, regretfully.
And to add to that, I think it also stems back to your environment. What was okay or acceptable in that environment? So if party A says, this is okay, this is what you can say, and party B is saying, this hurts, this offended me, like, what are you going to morally do? And this is why I think microaggressions plays a huge, huge role in what some people believe. It's a moral aspect, okay? Somebody's telling you, this thing is hurting me. Whether you believe deep down in your heart that's not offensive, you're taking it like too personally, well, you can't invalidate somebody else's feelings. And that's the problem with microaggressions. We're so quick to invalidate everybody's feelings because we don't want to look like the bad guy, but we end up looking like the bad guy when we try to invalidate people's feelings. All right, question 4. What are some of your experiences with microaggressions? Now, I don't want to put anybody on the spot with this one, but I know we had some pretty interesting conversations that, honestly, for people who are a little afraid to share, a lot of people relate. So, does anybody want to share their experience? Should I go first?
I moved here 2 years ago, and like where I came from in Indiana, we had like racism and microaggression, but it wasn't in my face. And when I moved here, I was on the other side of my street, and one of the guy's parents who lives in my neighborhood came outside, and I was talking to him, and he was like, "You're very articulate and very cultured." And I was in my head, I was like, what is that? What does that mean? And I like had a conversation with my mom about it, and she explained it as he hadn't seen somebody like me, like a black female 15-year-old who's like genuinely pretty nice to people and adults. It was just like very confusing, I guess, because it hadn't been put in my face before like that.
I actually think that along with like in your face, it's not just against you, it's against the entire group of people. Like, you're insulting all black women, all black people who have the capability to articulate themselves very well, but because of the way that they speak or the way that they act, they're deemed less worthy and they're deemed uncivilized, and that's just unfair.
To add to that, I think it goes back to what we said earlier. It's putting us in a category that all people should look like this. So when we don't fit in that box, it's surprising, it's shocking. Wow, it's a new achievement. Well, this is stuff that a lot of people have been doing for a while. Articulating your words, whether you choose to add slang or you choose to add your own sass to it, does not make you any less more intelligent than one group or another group, you know? And it just goes back to your environment. What did you see growing up? And to be told, a lot of people, and I think it goes back to us as well, because a lot of people try to cover that up and be, well, they meant no harm. If we keep making excuses for our oppressors, we're never going to actually create change. If somebody's wrong, we have to acknowledge that they were wrong and allow them to experience the ramifications of what they said. If we continue to put a Band-Aid over a cut, it's not going to heal. We need to actually do the hard work, the labor. We got to go into surgery, stitch it up. This is what you said. You know, put the antibiotics on it, however surgeons do it. And slap that rub on, you know? Like, we gotta actually do the hard work. And to be honest, the hard work is not always easy. It's not cute. You know, nobody wants to sit up there and point the finger and be like, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. But we have to, because if we don't, then we're allowing a generation of uneducated, ignorant people to continue to live in our society. And it's not trying to say that you're wrong and you're the problem, but we're just saying, how can we be better? We should all be striving to be better. Whether you want to be better or not, I hope you want to be better, you know? But we should all be striving to be better, and that better first starts with addressing what's wrong. This is where you messed up. You can't really be saying this. Okay, even if you weren't aware, you can still educate yourself. Like Dr. Thomas said and my good members said, you got Google. Everything. Okay, like, YouTube can help as well. We got resources. We got to use these resources and educate ourselves to help educate everybody else so that we can produce a better world.
guys so much for the wonderful discussion. I've heard so many great things. I just wanted to say that our goal here is unity, not uniformity. We get to unity through variety. Our differences must be integrated, not annihilated, not absorbed. Thank you guys so much.
Is somebody getting a picture?
Thank you all so much for coming. I'm trying not to cry because this is a big moment for us. Real quick before you all leave, thank you so much. My heart is so full that you all came out today. I mean, I don't even know how to express. My heart is like racing right now. The fact that so many people care and have supported us from the beginning of the year. Thank you, Spinner. Thank you, my department. Thank you, all the teachers who have came here and the students who have come. This is just the conversation, and this is something that we need to get started. There's no time to waste. Tomorrow's the day, tonight's the night, okay? Do your part. We're all in this together. It's not a white versus people of color. It's not a teacher versus student. It's none of that. We are all one family, okay? We are all one family, and we're here to support each other because at the end of the day, we all love each other very dearly. Real quick before you all leave, if we did not answer any questions, we really want to be proactive and make sure that we get back to you. There is a little paper with our schedule on there, has a QR code. If you scan that, you can submit feedback for us. You can submit questions that you may need answered, and we will get right back to you. But we really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for coming.
Turn your quiz back on. Okay, yeah.